The American Revolution secured independence, but independence alone could not guarantee liberty. In 1787, delegates from across the young nation gathered in Philadelphia to confront a difficult challenge, creating a government strong enough to endure, yet limited enough to remain free. Their debates, compromises, and vision produced one of the most influential governing documents in history. In this Quantum Quill Story edition, we step inside the Constitutional Convention and witness the creation of the framework that would shape the American Republic. This is the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution. Act 1. A Union in Peril. 1783 to 1787. The war had been won. That was the triumph everyone remembered. The surrender at Yorktown. The celebrations, the peace treaty, the birth of a new nation. Yet victory solved only one problem. America had secured independence. Now it had to survive it. For many leaders of the young republic, that challenge appeared far more difficult. Winning freedom had required courage. Preserving freedom would require wisdom. And wisdom, they feared, was in short supply. The 13 states stood united in name. In practice, they often behaved like 13 separate countries. Each guarded its own interests. Each protected its own authority. Each pursued its own priorities. The central government existed, but barely. Under the Articles of Confederation, Congress possessed responsibility without power. It could request money. It could not compel payment. It could negotiate treaties. It could not reliably enforce them. It could speak for the nation. It often could not act for the nation. The arrangement reflected understandable fears. Americans had fought a revolution against centralized authority. The last thing they wanted was another distant government exercising unchecked power. Yet avoiding one danger had created another. Weakness. The problems appeared everywhere. Congress accumulated debt from the Revolutionary War. The states rarely contributed enough money to pay it. Foreign nations questioned America's reliability. Trade disputes emerged between states. Economic uncertainty spread. Citizens grew frustrated. Merchants complained. Farmers struggled. Confidence weakened. The nation that had defeated the British Empire now struggled to govern itself. Many Americans hoped the difficulties were temporary. Others worried they revealed something deeper. Perhaps liberty alone was insufficient. Perhaps liberty required structure. One evening, George Washington sat quietly at Mount Vernon. The war had ended. He longed for peace, for farming, for private life. Few men had sacrificed more during the Revolution. Few desired retirement more deeply. Yet troubling reports continued arriving. Financial instability, political disputes, international embarrassments. Washington read carefully, then reread. The pattern disturbed him. The states had won independence together. Could they preserve it separately? He increasingly doubted it. Across the nation, other leaders reached similar conclusions. James Madison studied the weaknesses of confederacies throughout history. Ancient leagues, European alliances, political unions that collapsed under pressure. Again and again, the lesson appeared the same. Governments too weak to govern eventually failed. Madison's concern deepened. The United States seemed headed toward the same fate. Without reform, independence itself might be endangered. The revolution could still fail. Not on a battlefield, in a legislature. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens felt the consequences directly. a merchant in New York struggled with conflicting regulations imposed by neighboring states. A farmer in Massachusetts watched economic conditions deteriorate. A craftsman in Pennsylvania worried about unstable currency. The problems seemed different, yet they shared a common source. The nation lacked cohesion. America had gained freedom from Britain. It had not yet learned how to function as one people. Congress attempted solutions. Debates occurred. Committees formed. Proposals circulated. Little changed. Under the Articles, meaningful reform required unanimous approval from the states. Unanimous agreement proved nearly impossible. One state objected, then another. Progress stalled repeatedly. Frustration mounted. The machinery of government appeared incapable of repairing itself. The weakness had become structural, and structures rarely repair themselves without deliberate effort. Among the most concerned observers was Alexander Hamilton. Young, ambitious, energetic, Hamilton viewed national weakness as a serious threat. Foreign powers respected strength, not good intentions. Economic prosperity required stability, not improvisation. Government required authority, not merely aspiration. Many Americans found his arguments persuasive. Others found them alarming. The debate revealed a deeper question. How strong should government become? Too little power created disorder. Too much power threatened liberty. Finding the proper balance would become the central challenge of the age. The crisis intensified in western Massachusetts. Economic hardship produced anger. Anger produced resistance. Resistance produced rebellion. Farmers burdened by debt and taxation began closing courts and disrupting legal proceedings. The movement became known as Shays' Rebellion. To some observers, the uprising reflected legitimate grievances. To others, it revealed something more dangerous: the inability of government to maintain order. News spread rapidly. Across the country, citizens watched with concern. If states could not preserve stability within their own borders, what future awaited the Union? Washington followed events closely. The reports unsettled him deeply. The revolution had been fought to establish self-government. What if self-government descended into chaos? What if liberty became indistinguishable from disorder? The questions haunted many leaders. Freedom required more than independence. It required institutions capable of preserving both order and rights. Without them, the entire experiment might collapse. One afternoon, Madison sat surrounded by books. History occupied the table before him. Republics, confederacies, empires, governments risen and fallen. He searched for lessons, patterns, warnings. Most political systems failed eventually. The reasons varied: corruption, faction, weakness, concentration of power. Yet failure itself offered education. Perhaps America could learn from the mistakes of others. Perhaps the nation could build something more durable. The possibility inspired him. The challenge consumed him. In September 1786, delegates from several states gathered at Annapolis, Maryland. The meeting remained small, attendance disappointing. Yet the discussions proved important. Participants quickly recognized that trade issues represented only part of a larger problem. The entire structure of government required examination. Before departing, the delegates issued a recommendation. A broader convention should meet the following year. Representatives from every state should attend. The purpose would be nothing less than reconsidering the future of the Union. The suggestion seemed ambitious. Some considered it unrealistic. Others viewed it as essential. The proposal spread through the states. Debate followed. Supporters emphasized necessity. Opponents emphasized caution. Many Americans remained suspicious of centralized authority. The memory of British rule remained fresh. No one wanted to exchange one form of tyranny for another. The concern was reasonable. Yet supporters insisted reform need not threaten liberty. Properly designed government could protect freedom rather than destroy it. The argument gained traction, slowly, unevenly, but steadily. By early 1787, momentum had become difficult to ignore. The nation's difficulties persisted. Debt remained unresolved. Trade remained complicated. Political authority remained fragmented. Even skeptics acknowledged that something needed to change. The question was what? Minor adjustments? Major reforms? An entirely new framework? No one yet knew. Invitations went out. Delegates prepared to travel. Some approached the convention with optimism, others with apprehension. All understood its significance. The gathering might strengthen the Union or expose its divisions. Either outcome seemed possible. History often conceals turning points until after they occur. The Constitutional Convention would become one of those moments. At the time, it appeared merely another meeting, a meeting called to address practical problems. Its true importance remained hidden, even from many who would attend. Spring arrived. Roads filled with travelers. Carriages carried delegates toward Philadelphia. The city that had witnessed the Declaration of Independence would soon witness another act of nation-building. Yet this task differed profoundly from the first. The Declaration explained why Americans sought freedom. The Constitution would eventually explain how they intended to govern themselves. The first required courage. The second would require compromise. And compromise often proves the harder task. As delegates journeyed toward Philadelphia, uncertainty accompanied them. Would the states cooperate? Would reform succeed? Would the Union survive? No answers existed, only questions, and a growing sense that the future of the Republic hung in the balance. The Revolution had created a nation. Whether that nation could endure remained uncertain. The delegates carried different interests, different experiences, different visions, yet all shared one realization. The existing system could not continue indefinitely. Something had to change. The question before them was not whether to act. The question was whether they possessed the wisdom to build a government strong enough to preserve liberty and restrained enough to deserve it. In Philadelphia, that question awaited an answer, and history waited with it. The Constitution. Act 2. Behind Closed Doors. Philadelphia, May 1787. The delegates arrived quietly. No crowds lined the streets. No celebrations marked their arrival. No one yet understood the significance of what was about to occur. The men gathering in Philadelphia believed they had come to repair a government. Many would leave having created a new one. The difference was enormous and dangerous. The city welcomed representatives from across the Union. Some traveled hundreds of miles. Others endured weeks on rough roads. Each carried instructions from his state. Each carried personal convictions, and each carried concerns about the future. The delegates differed in age, in experience, in temperament, in vision. Yet nearly all agreed on one point. The existing system was failing. The Articles of Confederation no longer provided a stable foundation for the nation. Something had to change. The only question was how much. The convention assembled in the Pennsylvania State House. the same building where independence had been debated and declared, the same rooms where revolution had found its voice. Now, another challenge awaited. The delegates were not fighting a king. They were fighting uncertainty. The task before them seemed deceptively simple. Strengthen the Union, preserve liberty, create stability. The difficulty lay in accomplishing all three at once. One figure immediately commanded universal respect: George Washington. When he entered the chamber, conversations often paused, not because he demanded attention, because he inspired it. The former commander of the Continental Army possessed a reputation unlike any other American. He had surrendered power voluntarily, returned to private life willingly, demonstrated that leadership need not become ambition. His presence reassured many delegates. If Washington supported the convention, perhaps the nation would support it as well. The delegates unanimously elected him presiding officer. The choice required little debate. Some men are chosen because they seek authority. Washington was chosen because he did not. The convention quickly adopted a critical rule: secrecy. Windows remained closed despite the summer heat. Doors remained guarded. Discussions remained confidential. The decision puzzled some observers. Why conceal deliberations? The answer was practical. The delegates needed freedom to speak honestly, to change positions, to explore ideas. Public scrutiny might encourage speeches. Private deliberation encouraged solutions. History would later celebrate many of their debates. At the time, those debates occurred behind closed doors. Among the most prepared delegates was James Madison. For months, he had studied political history: ancient republics, modern confederacies, failed governments, successful governments. His preparation had a purpose. Madison intended to arrive with a plan. Not merely concerns, not merely complaints. A plan. Soon after the convention began, he presented it: the Virginia Plan. The proposal represented far more than a minor adjustment. It envisioned a fundamentally new system of government, a stronger national authority, separate branches, a legislature capable of acting directly upon citizens rather than relying entirely upon states. The proposal stunned some delegates. This was not repair. This was reconstruction. Debate erupted immediately. Supporters praised the plan's ambition. Critics questioned its implications. Smaller states expressed particular concern. Under Madison's proposal, representation would largely reflect population. Large states would gain influence. Small states feared marginalization. The concern was understandable. No state wished to surrender its voice, especially not voluntarily. The disagreement struck at the heart of the convention. What exactly was the Union? A collection of sovereign states, or one nation composed of citizens? The answer would determine everything else. One afternoon, delegates argued intensely. The room grew warm. Tempers occasionally followed. Some believed national authority remained dangerously weak. Others feared it might become dangerously strong. The memories of British rule remained vivid. No one wanted another distant power imposing its will. Yet neither did they want paralysis. The challenge resembled walking a narrow bridge. Too much authority threatened liberty. Too little authority threatened survival. The delegates searched for balance. Alexander Hamilton emerged as one of the strongest advocates for national power. Young compared with many colleagues, Hamilton possessed enormous energy. He admired efficiency, stability, effective government. To him, weakness represented a greater danger than strength. Governments incapable of acting eventually lost legitimacy. Citizens lost confidence. Nations declined. Hamilton's arguments often impressed listeners. They also alarmed them. Some delegates suspected he favored excessive centralization. The debates became increasingly intense, yet intensity served a purpose. Fundamental questions deserve serious disagreement. Meanwhile, Benjamin Franklin observed events with characteristic wisdom. At 81 years old, he was among the convention's oldest participants. Age limited his physical strength. It had not diminished his insight. Franklin understood human nature perhaps better than anyone in the room. He recognized that compromise would be essential. No delegate would receive everything desired. No state would receive everything desired. The Union itself depended upon accommodation. Franklin's influence often appeared subtle, yet subtle influence frequently proves powerful. As weeks passed, progress slowed. Arguments multiplied, positions hardened. Frustration increased. Several delegates privately wondered whether success remained possible. The divisions seemed profound. Large states versus small states. National authority versus state authority. Competing visions collided daily. Some feared the convention might fail entirely. The possibility was real. History offers no guarantees. Many important gatherings end without achievement. The Constitutional Convention might easily have joined them. Then the dispute over representation reached a breaking point. Delegates from smaller states introduced an alternative, the New Jersey Plan. Unlike Madison's proposal, it preserved much of the existing structure. Each state would continue receiving equal representation. National authority would increase somewhat. State sovereignty would remain largely intact. The contrast between the plans clarified the challenge. The delegates were no longer debating details. They were debating competing definitions of America. Was the nation primarily a union of states or a union of people? The arguments continued for days, sometimes weeks. At moments, the atmosphere became bleak. Delegates questioned one another's assumptions, motives, predictions. No resolution appeared obvious. Yet, despite the disagreements, something remarkable occurred. The delegates remained. They continued talking, continued listening, continued searching. In many nations, such divisions might have produced violence. In Philadelphia, they produced debate. The distinction mattered. Republican government depends upon disagreement managed peacefully. The convention embodied that principle, even when it struggled. Outside the hall, ordinary Americans knew little of these discussions. The secrecy rule kept details hidden. Citizens understood only that important men were meeting. Speculation filled taverns and newspapers. Some expected modest reforms. Few imagined the full scope of what was unfolding. Inside the chamber, the future architecture of American government was taking shape. Slowly, painfully, one argument at a time. Madison remained deeply involved. Day after day, he recorded proceedings, observed personalities, tracked proposals. His notes would later become one of history's most valuable records of the convention. Yet at the time, Madison focused on a more immediate concern: success. Without agreement, the Union might fracture. The consequences could be severe: economic conflict, political instability, even disunion. The dangers reinforced his determination. Failure was not impossible, but it was unacceptable. As June turned into July, compromise began emerging. Not complete agreement, not yet, but movement. Delegates increasingly recognized a fundamental truth. No side could impose its vision entirely. The nation was too diverse, the interests too varied, the stakes too high. Lasting solutions would require shared sacrifice, shared concessions, shared ownership. The realization marked a turning point. The convention stopped asking who would win. It started asking how the Union might endure. One evening, Washington remained seated after others departed. The room had grown quiet. The day's arguments still lingered in memory. The challenges remained substantial. Yet something encouraged him. Despite profound disagreements, the delegates continued working, continued searching, continued believing a solution existed. Perhaps that persistence represented the convention's greatest strength. Not brilliance, not eloquence, determination, the willingness to continue. The Constitution had not yet been written. The framework remained incomplete. Major disputes remained unresolved, yet the foundation was beginning to emerge. A stronger national government, separate branches of power, checks against abuse, mechanisms for representation. The outlines remained rough, but visible. The delegates could finally glimpse what they were building, and what they were building might just preserve the Republic. The debates would continue. The compromises would deepen. The decisions would become even more consequential. For now, however, one thing had become clear. The future of the United States would not be forged on battlefields. It would be forged in argument, in compromise, in the difficult work of self-government. And behind the closed doors of Philadelphia, that work had only begun. The Constitution. Act 3. A More Perfect Union. Philadelphia, July to September, 1787. The convention had reached a crossroads. For weeks, the delegates debated, argued, persuaded, compromised. Yet the most dangerous disagreements remained unresolved. The future of the Union hung in the balance. Every delegate understood the stakes. Failure would not simply end the convention. Failure might end the American experiment itself. The young republic stood divided between competing visions. Large states feared weakness. Small states feared domination. Both fears were legitimate. Neither could be ignored. If one side prevailed completely, the other might walk away. And if states walked away, the Union could unravel. The crisis centered on representation. The issue seemed technical. It was not. Representation determined power. Power determined influence. Influence determined the future. The Virginia Plan favored representation based largely upon population. Large states supported it enthusiastically. Why shouldn't they? They represented more citizens, contributed more resources, possessed greater populations. To them, proportional representation seemed fair. The smaller states disagreed. Equal representation protected their interests. Without it, they feared becoming political spectators in a government controlled by larger neighbors. The disagreement cut deeply. Neither side would surrender easily. Day after day, the arguments continued. Voices rose. Tempers occasionally flared. Some delegates began questioning whether agreement remained possible. A few even discussed leaving. The atmosphere grew tense. At one particularly discouraging moment, Benjamin Franklin rose to address the convention. Age had slowed his body, not his wisdom. Franklin reminded the delegates that perfection was impossible. Every participant carried flaws. Every proposal carried imperfections. The goal was not perfection. The goal was preservation. A republic could survive compromise. it might not survive pride. The room listened carefully. Franklin possessed a rare gift. He could reduce complicated disputes to simple truths, and the truth was clear. Unless the delegates learned to yield, they would fail. Eventually, a solution emerged, not from victory, from compromise. The proposal became known as the Great Compromise. Its elegance lay in its balance. The House of Representatives would reflect population. Larger states would receive greater representation. The Senate would provide equal representation for each state. Large and small states alike would possess 2 senators. Neither side received everything desired. Both sides received enough. The compromise preserved the convention. More importantly, it preserved the Union. Years later, Americans would celebrate the Constitution itself. Few would fully appreciate how close the convention came to collapse before that compromise appeared. The delegates moved forward. One obstacle had been overcome. Others remained. The structure of government itself required definition. How should power be organized? How could authority remain effective without becoming dangerous? The revolution had been fought against concentrated power. The delegates had no desire to recreate it. Yet they also understood that weakness invited failure. The solution required imagination and balance. Gradually, a framework emerged. 3 branches, 3 centers of authority, each independent, each connected, each capable of restraining the others: legislative, executive, judicial. The arrangement represented something remarkable. Power would not reside in one person, nor in one institution, nor in one state. Power would be divided deliberately. Ambition would restrain ambition. Authority would check authority. The government would possess strength, yet no single part would possess too much. The design reflected a profound understanding of human nature. People are capable of great things. They can also abuse power. The Constitution would account for both realities. James Madison watched these developments carefully. Many of the principles reflected ideas he had long advocated. Yet even Madison understood that the final product belonged to many minds. The Constitution was not the triumph of one individual. It was the achievement of collective effort, debate, revision, compromise. The document grew stronger precisely because it had been challenged. Every criticism forced improvement. Every disagreement exposed weaknesses. The delegates were not merely drafting a government, they were testing it before it existed. Another difficult issue soon emerged. How should the executive branch function? Some delegates feared creating an elected monarch. Others feared creating a weak administrator incapable of leadership. The challenge echoed throughout the convention. Too much power threatened liberty. Too little power threatened effectiveness. The balance required careful calibration. Eventually, the delegates agreed upon a single president, chosen indirectly through an electoral process, limited by law, subject to removal under extraordinary circumstances, powerful enough to govern, constrained enough to remain accountable. The solution reflected the convention's broader philosophy: balance, always balance. Outside the hall, Philadelphia endured one of the hottest summers in memory. Windows remained closed to preserve secrecy. The air inside became oppressive. Delegates perspired through long sessions, yet they continued working, hour after hour, day after day. The physical discomfort mirrored the political difficulty. Nothing about the Constitution emerged easily. Every provision required effort. Every agreement required sacrifice. The final document would appear orderly. Its creation was anything but. The judicial branch received attention as well. Courts would interpret laws, resolve disputes, preserve consistency. The delegates recognized that republics require more than legislation. They require impartial judgment. The law must mean the same thing in Massachusetts as in Virginia, in Pennsylvania as in Georgia. A nation divided by conflicting interpretations could not remain united long. The judiciary would help provide coherence, a quiet power, yet an essential one. As August approached, the Constitution began taking recognizable form. Pages accumulated, sections multiplied, principles became provisions, ideas became institutions. The delegates could finally see the structure they had been building. Not perfect, not complete, but real. The possibility of success no longer seemed distant. It stood before them, written in ink. Still, doubts persisted. Some delegates worried the government remained too strong. Others worried it remained too weak. Some wanted additional protections. Others wanted greater authority. The disagreements never disappeared entirely, nor should they have. The Constitution emerged from debate because free societies depend upon debate. Consensus does not require uniformity. It requires enough agreement to move forward together. The convention gradually achieved exactly that. On September 17, 1787, the delegates gathered for the final time. The Constitution lay completed before them. Months of labor had produced a new framework of government. Now came the moment of decision. Would they sign? Not everyone approved every provision. Several delegates refused. Most agreed, not because the document was flawless, because it was the best achievable path forward. Benjamin Franklin offered one final reflection. He admitted having reservations, yet he supported the Constitution nonetheless. The older he became, he observed, the less certain he felt about his own infallibility. The remark captured the spirit of the convention. Humility had succeeded where certainty might have failed. One by one, delegates approached the document. One by one, they signed. Their signatures represented more than approval. They represented faith. Faith that Americans could govern themselves. Faith that compromise could triumph over division. Faith that liberty and order could coexist. As the final signatures dried, a curious question lingered. What now? The convention had created a constitution. The Constitution did not yet govern anything. The states still had to approve it. The people still had to accept it. The greatest debate remained ahead. Ratification would determine whether the document lived or died. The delegates understood this. Their work was complete. The nation's work was only beginning. As participants prepared to depart Philadelphia, someone reportedly asked Franklin what sort of government had been created. His answer became famous. A republic, if you can keep it. The statement contained both optimism and warning. The Constitution offered opportunity, not guarantees. Success would depend upon future generations, upon citizens, leaders, institutions. The republic would require maintenance, attention, commitment. Liberty always does. The delegates left Philadelphia carrying copies of the Constitution. Carriages rolled away from the city. Roads stretched toward distant states. The document traveled with them. Soon it would be debated in newspapers, taverns, churches, legislatures, homes. Supporters would praise it. Critics would challenge it. Americans would decide its fate. The convention had done all it could. The Constitution now belonged to the nation. Looking back, the achievement seemed improbable. Only a few years earlier, the states struggled under a weak confederation. Distrust ran deep. Interests conflicted. Failure appeared likely. Yet the delegates had accomplished something extraordinary, not because they eliminated disagreement, because they learned to work through it. The Constitution emerged from argument, compromise, and the recognition that the Union mattered more than any single faction. At the beginning of the convention, the United States risked becoming little more than a loose collection of independent states. At its conclusion, a new possibility existed: a stronger union, a functioning republic, a government capable of acting while remaining accountable. The preamble would later summarize the purpose elegantly: to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. Those aspirations remained ambitious, perhaps impossible to fulfill completely, yet they provided direction, a destination, a promise. The Constitution was not the end of America's story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. The Revolution had won independence. The Constitution sought to preserve it. The Declaration had explained why Americans desired freedom. The Constitution explained how freedom might endure. Together, they formed the foundation of the Republic. And as the delegates departed Philadelphia in the autumn of 1787, they left behind more than a document. They left behind a framework for self-government, a daring experiment, a republic, and the hope that future generations would prove worthy of it. The ink dried, the debates moved outward, the nation waited, and the Constitution began its journey into history. You have reached the end of the Constitution of the United States. From months of debate emerged a bold experiment in self-government, one designed to balance liberty with authority, power with restraint, and the interests of states with those of a nation. Yet the Constitution's future remained uncertain. Before it could become the law of the land, it would have to earn the trust and approval of the American people. The battle for independence had been won. The battle for ratification was about to begin. Next, we continue the journey with the Federalist Papers, where some of the founding era's greatest thinkers made the case for the new Constitution and the future of the American Republic. This has been the Constitution of the United States, a Quantum Quill Story edition.